Thanks everyone for coming. I'm Mark Kennedy. I'm an associate professor in the business school and also co-director of our Data Science Institute. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this event tonight to launch a contest that we're calling 0x. What is that? We all live in an age where technology that was going to do great things for us has done those great things, but also has had some side effects that we didn't quite see coming. And we talk about those in the language of strategy and economics as negative externalities. So the things that aren't priced into our transactions but are left outside, often landing on somebody else who isn't collecting the goods that come, or the goodies that come from the goods that we produce. So how do we get rid of those? That's what this is about. How do we zero out the negative externalities of the world that we live in? That's the focus of this evening's event. And we are very, very privileged to have with us Dr. Julian Huppert from Cambridge, director of the Intellectual Forum at Jesus College there. And through my colleague Rafa, I've been privileged to hear Julian, who recently came and spoke to our students at the Design School of Engineering, Dyson Design School of Engineering. And so I know you're in for a treat. Let me just go through the running order before I bring up Julian. So we'll hear from Julian. We'll have a chance to ask him some questions. And then we have gathered with us an impressive group of people who will also be a panel to talk through some of the issues that are from the contest and also from many of the things that Julian's going to engage us on this evening. And then we'll have some refreshments. So that is the plan. Julian, thank you so much for coming. And now it is over to you. Shall we welcome him?
It's great to be here, and thank you very much, Mark, for the invitation. So I used to be the Member of Parliament for Cambridge, and there's a rule in Parliament that there must be 40 members present for any debate to count. But there's also a rule which says that the House may not be counted at any time. And so you're not allowed to count how many people there are, just in case it's not quite right. There's all sorts of shenanigans about that. But it's lovely to be here and to see sort of a very focused audience and so many of you here. So I was asked to just sort of say a few words, I guess, to entertain, to provoke, about technology. So technology is changing the world. You know, we know this. There are absolutely amazing things that can be achieved, but there are also downsides. There are some problems that we see already and some that have not yet come to pass. And navigating how we get around those is going to be an enormous challenge. How do we get all those benefits without the problems? And I think that probably is one of the absolutely key questions for this decade, perhaps for much of the century to come. And so I'm really pleased that this competition has been set up. And I'm just particularly pleased, we'll hear more about this later, that it's been set up in memory of Lord Harry Renwick. We'll hear more about Harry later, and there are people here who knew him much, much better than I did. He was around from 1935 till 2020 and saw immense changes. He was a member of the House of Lords from 1973 to 99, president of Eurem, now the Digital Policy Alliance. And his work and his vision were absolutely transformational. His work with the Parliamentary IT Committee, PITCOM, was absolutely crucial, trying to get conversations in Parliament about technology to be even vaguely sensible. And there are people who will know the experience of trying to get parliamentarians to actually talk sensibly. I always think there are three groups of parliamentarians when it comes to technology. There's the set who get it, who actually understand the nuances, understand what they're trying to do. You may or may not agree with them, but they get it. They don't necessarily know how to code, that's sort of irrelevant, but they get what they're talking about. There's then a set who are anti, who really dislike the way the era is changing. I was talking to was an event with a Conservative MP, I probably shouldn't say which constituency they were from, where they said that they were sent to Parliament to try to restore the early 20th century social order in their rural constituency. Technology is not likely to play a part in that. And I certainly won't mention people like Jacob Rees-Mogg or Nadine Dorries. You may have heard the story about Nadine going to Microsoft and asking when they were going to stop using algorithms. So there's a set who are sort of anti, but the vast majority are actually people who are quite pro-technology. In fact, they're almost too pro-technology. And they say it as a magic wand. You can just wave at something and say, look, let's just throw machine learning at something and magically answers will always come out and it will be great. And there's a real worry about some of them. They are naive about what you can do and don't understand some of the limits. They're often very good people. They're often very well-meaning people, but they don't really think about the challenges and how to solve them. I first got involved with parliamentary campaigning on the Digital Economy Act that was rushed through in 2010. I see a huge fan of it sat in the front row here. And there was a particular aspect there that if you were accused of downloading copyrighted material 3 times, you could be disconnected from the internet. UK Music were quite keen on this. Many of us were not so keen. But the minister who was talking about it kept referring to IP addresses as intellectual property addresses, which didn't make many of us think that he knew exactly what he was doing. So it's a huge challenge in Parliament, and we need more like Harry to continue that work. And not just the technology work. I mean, as we'll hear again later, the work he did on dyslexia and so much more. You know, he really was an inspirational character who did so much for all of us. But to come back to the question about technology and the externalities that Mark was talking about, why aren't things better? Is it because governments here or elsewhere in the world are just sort of stupid or too hidebound to change? Is it because the companies are just too greedy to do the right thing? I actually think it's deeper than that. I think there's actually just not enough really good, really implementable ideas about what we need to do to fix the various problems that we have. And I think that's why it's so important to have this competition, to generate those ideas, to come up with suggestions. So we have way better options that people like me, people like everyone else here, can then try to implement. And there are so many things that we need to do. You know, just before I came here, I checked Twitter was still working. I don't know if that's still true. But what do we think about the changes that have happened in the public sphere? Has technology been this essential thing to create a public sphere that never was there, to create mechanisms for conversation around the world that never happened before? You know, Twitter, Facebook, and various others have been implicated in huge amounts of positive conversation. Or have they been responsible for completely fragmenting the public sphere, for breaking apart the idea that we're all in one space having one conversation, and in fact we're having lots and lots and lots of different conversations? The way that adverts can be targeted. When I was a political campaigner, of course I said different things to different people, but about different subjects, because this person wanted to know about education, that one person wanted to know about the roads. Now you can say completely opposing things to people in neighbouring houses and they will never know. So is that the challenge that we need to pick up on? Is it about the toxic behaviour online and the way people are absolutely abused? I've seen only tiny hints of that. And as a straight white man, I've seen much, much less than many people I know. But how do we fix some of that toxic behaviour without having the Scunthorpe problem, with early filters that just obliterated Scunthorpe from the web? How do we avoid the problems that happened to some chess forums, which were all blocked for being deeply racist? You know, it's really awful if you look there. There's lots of stuff about black attacking white, white attacking black. It's a nasty, nasty place. How do you get rid of the bad things, but keep all the good things? Or actually, is that not even really the problem, awful though it is the fundamental problem, the polarisation that we're seeing? And are we seeing polarisation because of echo chambers where everybody thinks the same thing? Or is it an acceleration of the outwards processes that mean that even if people read everything, they polarise? I suspect if everybody here read an article in The Guardian and the Daily Mail about the same story, we would all agree with one of them and not the other. We might not agree on which one is trustworthy, but we'd be pulled further apart even if we read both of them. So is it about polarisation? Or actually, is it an underpinning question about rules and the rule of law? And who sets the rules? And should it be companies that set the rules, or governments who set the rules, or individuals who set their own rules and control their own sovereign data? How do we think about who ought to be making any of those decisions? And do we want one set of global rules? Do we think there will be 3 sets of global rules, that there will be a US-based system where the company is king, a European system where individual people's data is the most important thing, and a Chinese system where the state does whatever it likes, with Britain floating around wherever you think it best fits? Or do we want to try to broker something which covers all of those, or fragment further? What would companies even like? We've talked about GDPR has been an amazing thing. There's talk in the UK now about trying to change it and adjust it. And actually, many companies I talk to say, no, leave it alone. It's not perfect. We'd like one thing, not 17 different rules, even if some of them are slightly better for us than others. But or is this all completely wrong anyway? And it's not about what happens. It's not about the rules. It's just a simple question of power. Is the biggest problem with technology simply an over-concentration of power in a few companies which are displacing all the others? Is the problem Amazon's size, not anything they do? And is it concentration of power in companies, or is it individuals? Is it that Zuckerberg is the problem? If so, what do we do? Or actually, are we completely barking up, and it's not about those things, it's about individual people? Is it about people who are digitally excluded, who'll be left out, that everything else will be wonderful, everyone else will be getting lots of things that they can do, but they will not get them? How essential is it to be digitally connected and engaged? And if I can quote from one of Harry's maiden speech, in fact, in 1975, where he said, literacy, like food, assumes a far greater importance to those who have not got it. Is that actually the key message for digital connectivity? That we all assume everybody has it, that everybody can do everything on their apps? And is it actually about the people who are left behind, for whatever reason, wherever they may be? Or is it about bias in recruitment, bias in service provision? That it's people as subjects of the system who are not treated fairly? Or maybe the problem is surveillance and the amount of power that the state can have to spy on us. Or maybe the state is irrelevant and it's about companies. Or cyber criminals. What is the question? Is it AI out of control? If you haven't played Universal Paperclips as an example of how AI can take over, is that it? Or is it the metaverse, whatever that may be? Neil Stephenson's dystopian take on it, or the meta version of it now. What is it? And are the problems that we need to tackle specific or holistic? Do we need a digital bill of rights to cover everything and try to sweep everything up into one go? There's so many things there, and I could go on. And then there's questions about what the tools are that we have available for any system, because simply saying it would be nice if the world was a good place, we know that doesn't work. So what are the tools and which ones actually work? GDPR, I didn't think it was ever going to land. And despite efforts to weaken it, actually it's now, there are other places who are trying to pick it up as a standard that could be applied, even in the Americas. Or online harms. I won't ask for a show of hands of who here thinks the online harms legislation, online safety legislation, will actually make it. Is it just too hard to write laws which say, keep the good things, stop the bad things, work it out later? Or should we use other tools rather than legislation? Should we be trying to look at financial incentives? Should we be trying to encourage whatever we consider to be good behaviour through procurement? Through saying we will pay for services, for software, for systems that meet particular standards and elevate the level that way? Is it actually more about advertisers? We're seeing again with Twitter the power of advertisers to say, no, morally we want this because we do not want to be associated with things we're uncomfortable with. Is that the sort of tool? Is it about helping companies to be more profitable? Because one thing companies don't want is an uncertain legislative environment. They would quite like to know what would happen. They'd like to know if they're skating close to the edge or somewhere safe. They don't want to find out. I was involved with this in, well, I'll say a bit more about solutions in a moment. Is it about setting social norms so that we all just abhor the things that are unacceptable? And that somehow that works. Sort of Mastodon are trying some of that, about Reddit moderation styles. And how do we enforce any of this? There's little point having rules if there isn't a real power for enforcement, a real power to check that things haven't gone wrong. So there's lots of things, lots of sketches, lots of ideas there. What I want to just talk about is a few examples of things that I've tried to address this. Now, on the one hand, I think they're all quite good. or else I wouldn't be talking about them. On the other hand, they clearly haven't worked, or else things would be better. But they were trying to explore a few things. And I know some of you have heard me talk about this before, and I apologise, you shouldn't come to my lectures more than once. So I did try writing a digital Bill of Rights for the Lib Dems. It's still around online. We tried to capture everything into 13 big issues. I hope that nod means you've read it rather than you're like, oh, fantastic, you have, good. And we tried to explore how to do all of this in one package. Some of those principles I think are still pretty good, but actually I look back, this was 8 years ago or so now, there's things we just didn't think of. Is there an updated thing where you could have a Bill of Rights that applies here and elsewhere? Possibly the thing I spent the most time on was trying to look at how you should achieve good quality and trustworthy businesses. So one of the big problems in the tech sector is people don't trust the companies. Levels of trust are really, really low, and in many cases with very good reason. So how do we fix trust? And part of the answer is to say that's the wrong question. Trust is a very bad measure of anything we ought to care about. Honora O'Neill has given brilliant lectures about the difference between trust and trustworthiness. As she would always say, Bernie Madoff was highly trusted up until the moment where he ran off with everybody's money. I won't mention any crypto exchanges where the same thing could be said. So how do you show trustworthiness? How do you persuade people that you or your organisation ought to be trusted? And one approach is to go for a fairly radical transparency agenda. Monzo have tried this, Yoti have, and I was involved with trying to set that up with DeepMind Health. So DeepMind is, I think, the world's best and most interesting real machine learning AI organisation. If we're ever going to get artificial general intelligence, I suspect it'll be them. That's not to say I think we will get it very soon, but I think they're the leaders. And they wanted to go into the healthcare arena, and they knew there would be questions asked. So they said, how can we show people that we're trusted? And the approach, and it came from Mus Suleiman, who was one of the founders of DeepMind and set up DeepMind Health, was to say, let's try a radical governance approach. Let's find some trusted people and ask them to find out what we're doing and be public about what they find. So 10 of us were appointed as independent reviewers and given complete power to look at anything that DeepMind Health were doing. By agreement, we had access to anything that wasn't confidential patient data, and we were under no confidentiality obligations of any kind. We had to produce an annual public report, but we could also talk to the press any time. I could walk out of a meeting and say, I'm shocked by what I've just seen in their plans. Or when they said this publicly, it turns out that's not what they mean. And we also had a budget to commission people to do detailed work. So one of the examples that we did there was to look at the technical security. So we hired an external company to go through all of their code, the physical security of the data center, the whole lot. And we published every single vulnerability that we found. There were no critical or serious ones. There were one or two minor ones and a few very small ones, all of which they fixed. And the idea was that by doing this sort of public audit, you could trust them better because they'd taken this risky approach of letting somebody outside say what the problems were. Now, I did talk to Microsoft's health team, and they said, we don't need to do that because all our stuff is completely secure. Would you trust the people who tell you their stuff is perfect, or the people who say it's not perfect, we know what the problems are, here they are, and we're working on them? So that I would love to see rolled out. This is my idea for the competition. I'm not going to actually submit one. It seems a bit unfair. Is could we find ways of having standards to go up like that, to get people to voluntarily audit? Could we persuade the NHS to say a condition for us to buy any software is that you have done this? Would companies be brave enough and confident enough to do it? We did a lot of other things with DeepMind Health. Eventually, DeepMind Health was broken up into Google Health and back into DeepMind, we were disbanded. But it certainly tried out and pioneered quite a risky, open, transparent approach. There was a big fuss about whether DeepMind Health had broken the law with their deal with the Royal Free Hospital, some of you may know. And we had money from them and we commissioned an independent legal opinion on it, which we published. It said they hadn't broken the law, but if it had done, they would have paid for a study which showed that they had. Will companies try to take that sort of risk? So that's one approach. The other one, I said I'd say a little bit about de-risking. So currently we have a system where a lot of companies will do something and then find out later whether it was actually legal or not. And that's part of the design system. It's the same with criminal offences. You don't actually know that something's criminal until you've actually been convicted. But that's not great for a company that's going to do a big project and might be in a controversial area. And frankly, anything in health is always going to be a controversial area. It's very, very hard to do things which are non-controversial. And you won't know whether you're okay until the end. So could we change that and find a way to de-risk by giving some feedback at the beginning, which regulators and maybe even the courts would pay attention to? So one of these came out. We did some work with the Wellcome Trust and various others to look at the issue of direct patient care. So to slightly simplify the legal details, data can be shared for direct patient care, but it needs to be something which a reasonable person would think was reasonably predictable. So there's a sort of very subjective test there. And so the risk is that you do something, you get to the end, and then there's the ICO or whichever regulator says, yeah, on balance, we think that went a bit far. So could we have a citizens' jury process run by somebody like the Wellcome Trust, where they say, if you want to do a new thing, come and run it through us, talk to a panel that we'll pull together, see what they think. It's not a guarantee that you'll be fine, but we want the regulators and anyone else to pay attention to the fact that you tried to find out. You checked that this would probably be okay before you went ahead. Or you said, we're thinking about doing this, and the response is, yeah, no. And at least then you as a company know that it's too risky. Or if you do take the risk, it's your own fault. Another one, and this is perhaps one of my favourite overall governance things, and it's not mine at all. I've completely and utterly stolen it from the wonderful Sam Gilbert. Sam wrote a great book, Good Data. I hope some of you have read Good Data. Good to see at least one nod. Sam was employee number 1 at Bought by Many, and they developed very specialist insurance using Google search data to identify the fact that the biggest unmet gap in the UK for specialist insurance was pugs. Pug insurance was the thing that you couldn't get, so they created a pug insurance product. Really interesting use of Google data and Facebook access to really build a fascinating company. And he's done some really nice work looking at a metric of legitimacy. So there's the idea of input legitimacy and output legitimacy. So input legitimacy in the form of a government is normally about how did it get into power, how was it elected. Output legitimacy is what does it do in power. What is it? So you could have a military coup, which would not have any legitimacy to get there, but might do very good things. Or you might, I know this is hard to imagine in this country, have a government which was perfectly legitimately elected and then did some bad things. So he came up with this idea that you could rate tech companies, and he suggested 5 measures. So you could rate them on input, so transparency of their business model and their governance, and outputs. And he suggested the distributional consequences, user empowerment, and how they control abuses. You could tweak this somewhat. And you could then rate a company. And so he, for example, publicly rated Facebook on each of those. And Facebook do really well on some and really badly on others. And the vision would be to have maybe an index of this. I'd love to get The Economist to do this. Every year to rate all the companies on these 5 metrics. Until if you want to go up in the ratings, this is what you have to do. This is what you need to fix. So could we produce an index of legitimacy of companies as a tool to push them up the agenda? This is being tried in climate areas. There's lots more that we could do. So that's a few ideas. But what we know is that we need more ideas, and we certainly need better ideas than any I'm going to come up with. And that's where this competition and you, the students, come in. So thank you very much for listening. I look forward to hearing the results and seeing the results. Thank you.
We're going to have a discussion amongst ourselves. Will give us a chance to react to some of the things that you said, Julian. So I'd like to introduce, if I'll let you take the center if you don't mind. We're going to basically lean on the table here. So Dr. Louise Bennett, Victoria Barnes, Dr. Jan Dowman, and my colleague Rafael Calvo. And I'm going to basically ask you each, yes, please, Rafa. I'm going to ask you each a question. And since, Julian, you've led off, we'll come and finish with you at the end of this. And the question is simply this. I'm going to read from a brief that we shared amongst ourselves here. And this is a line that came from Jan Dowman, who we'll speak more about later, but you should know that he has generously funded this contest. This contest is about the consequences of digital technologies and related business models, things that positively make you seethe. So I quite like the way that Jan put that, and I thought, let's just use that as a way to think about what it is that we'd like to do differently. Now, I want to say two things as we sort of tee this question up for discussion. One is that that focuses on the negative feelings we have. But equally, here we are at Imperial College, science and technology, medicine, business. We're really a place that specializes in thinking positively about what we can do that will make the world a better place. But in that, we want to pay attention to cleaning up the tailings that we leave behind as well. So the goal here is to pick whichever side of that fence you want to sit on and talk about something that we could do better. So Victoria, would you like to start?
Yeah, certainly. So there are lots of, do I have a mic?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So there are lots of things around this subject that make me seethe. And I think a lot of them come under the umbrella of tech bro culture. The reason being that tech bro culture is what has generated unreasonable expectations among governments of what AI can do. So speaking to Julian's point earlier, I've come up against ministerial expectations that we can just build an algorithm that will fix end-to-end encryption, that we can build an algorithm where we can push a button and find all the terrorists, find all the child abusers, find all the bad actors, and then we can report them all to the relevant authorities. Tech bro culture is what has led to Elon Musk sending a memo to all of Twitter's staff saying that they need to be more hardcore. And if they're not more hardcore, they can leave. Now, bearing in mind that those employee numbers have been, well, not just decimated, halved in recent weeks. That's a lot of pressure to put on a very small number of people to keep a platform working and safe. But my favorite of these that has really made me seethe in the last few days has been Palmer Luckey, the founder of Oculus, who recently announced that he has built a VR headset that will really kill somebody in real life if their character dies in the metaverse. And this is a classic example of someone building something simply because they could, not because it was the right thing to do or because it had gone through the right process of checks and balances. Hey, it's a fun thing to be able to do it, a little bit like Elon's flamethrowers. But should they exist? And should they be available on the open market? Or is this just some kind of niche, arguably shady use for a defense contractor? Now, many of us who work on the metaverse have been considering for quite some time the ethical process that we need to go through when we have massively immersive environments. So massive in terms of the scale of the environment, but also the scale of the user numbers. And we're still very much at that stage where when we're playing online games, it's kind of okay to kill somebody else. It's kind of okay to kill another character, because all that dies is their data, all that dies is their avatar. But as we become more emotionally, psychologically connected and impacted, and as haptic technology allows us to feel physical sensation in these immersive environments, we need to consider whether actually it might not be okay to just kill people in the metaverse. And this is something we've been thinking about. And so the reason Palmer Luckey's announcement makes me seethe is that he's leapfrogged that very important ethical consideration and just said, you know what, I don't care about that. We're just going to kill people in real life. That's quite a long-winded way of answering your question, but it does make me seethe.
Well, quite a lot of things make me seethe, actually. But there's a general one that runs through an awful lot of data science and scientists and technologists' use of data. And that is that they don't, at the very beginning, think, what quality of data do I actually need in what volume in order to be able to get a reasonable answer to this question? And that really, really annoys me. And one example that I worked on from very early days that annoys me above all else is to do with CCTV surveillance by the police. I was involved in developing that in the very early stages. And we were doing something very, very specific, which was to look for IRA terrorists with very bad CCTV cameras in pubs and things, black and white. And we were comparing them with people we knew had been doing things. We wanted to know who they met, etc. So the defining features that we chose and the relationships between eye, hairline, mouth, chin, etc., was for one very specific demographic. And it worked for that demographic because that was what we were focused on. That's the question we wanted to answer. That then got taken up as the set of numbers you should use for everybody in the world, every ethnicity, every color of skin, etc. And then you have people saying, well, it doesn't recognize people of color. Well, we chose things that you could see with a terribly murky CCTV camera that was black and white. And if you have a dark-skinned person on a dark night, you cannot pick up those things. And if suppose I was the Chinese state wanting to tell Han from Uyghur, I would have a different set of numbers. So people often take a data set that's been used for one purpose, repurpose it, and make the most terrible mistakes and biases as a result. You have to say, if I'm trying to solve this problem, what would be the perfect data set I would have? How many people or whatever do I need in that data set? But also, is there one out there that I can use? And you have to understand what, if you're going to repurpose, what that first thing was used for. Now, I think this happens in a lot of very important areas where data, particularly personal data, is being used now. So it makes me see if people don't do the right thing with that. So I don't want to see that in any of the things that I have to judge.
I'm not sure if I can identify any particular thing that annoys me a lot, but people do tend to forget history. And when you design technologies, forgetting the history can lead to very negative results. So for better or worse, I grew up from an Argentinian family who had to be exiled in the 70s. And when you grow in an environment full of refugees or exiles, etc., and you see the impact that an authoritarian government can have on the population, it makes you rethink how the systems you create could lead to supporting that sort of states. In that case, the governments were from the extreme right. But my wife comes from a Cuban family where it was from the extreme left. And they had to go in exile to Florida. So technologies that support this sort of radicalization, and state radicalization in particular, are quite scary. And I think the fact that people sometimes forget history and using history to inform the design of new platforms, it's one of the biggest scariest things of technology today.
So Julian, you had a chance to give us quite a few things to think about, but do you mind if we put you on the spot and say, is there something that you would say, this bugs me? Or this we can fix, as I said.
So I mean, I think the things we've just heard are really, really key. We haven't really talked about the environment and the immense, completely unnecessary harm that is inflicted on the environment by gross overuse. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the figures, I think, with Bitcoin. Paying for a hamburger with Bitcoin in California has the same environmental impact as driving to New York to buy it and driving back again. You know, the scale of completely pointless environmental harm is just colossal. And I think that just really, really seeks me. I mean, frankly, almost everything to do with blockchain annoys me because it's almost all complete rubbish. There's a few exceptions. Last week, I was hosting a Nigerian group, and we did have a Nigerian prince with us who wanted to invest. But that's not always true when you hear those emails. In the same way, some blockchain is true, but much of it isn't. So I think that sees me. But the thing is, despite everything, I'm actually a huge tech optimist. And I'm really excited about where we might be able to get. And that's what keeps me going. I spent a lot of my parliamentary career and various other things talking about all the problems. But I still think it's brilliant. You know, the fact that you can communicate with people anywhere in the world. Imagine what the pandemic would have been like without Zoom, you know, without the ability to talk, to see people. You know, it's not that long ago, you might have had the occasional phone call, but not seen your loved ones who might be somewhere else. There is a huge democratization that's possible, that suddenly you can share information around the world very, very easily, very, very freely. You know, it's brilliant. I just really hope we land the excitement, you know, and actually, if anything would make me see that it would be missing out on all the upside.
Yeah, being too negative, perhaps. So, Jan, over to you.
Thank you. Let me. I do see about a lot of things, but let me start with a story, personal story. So 50 years ago, I worked at IBM, so I'm a lot older than everybody, but and what I was part of a group that worked with an MP to draft the first ever data protection bill. That was us as a corporate. Why? Because the company was determined to minimize the negative consequences of its own technology, and they saw the danger of abuse of databases by government in particular in terms of invading privacy. So, and that was a company commitment. In fact, we had a project with MIT on social impact on technology and so on. And that, I think, is what's missing if you look at most corporates. I mean, there are some companies that do the same thing today, right? It is your own corporate responsibility and individual responsibility of employees, researchers, scientists, and students, and everybody else to proactively try to assess the negative consequences of what they're doing and to try to do something about it before those consequences occur. So I think governments can do a lot, they can do policies, and actually it takes a huge amount of time, and we never get very far. And we can have this conversation with government 10 years from now. But if we can get individuals and corporates to act with, let's call it integrity. I mean, I define integrity as doing the right thing irrespective of the rules and laws and regulations. It's to think about what is the right thing to be doing for me as an individual or me as a company. I think that's probably going to be a more productive route than waiting for governments. That's my opinion. And what I see about all the time is the Silicon Valley value system, where they don't seem to care, right? They have the technologies to stop many of the bad things that are happening. They have them, but they don't care. And that's what makes me really see they're causing a lot, not everybody obviously, but they're causing a lot of damage. And if they were trying to do something about it themselves, as opposed to being pressured into bits and pieces by governments and pressure groups and so on, then okay, even if it's a bit late. But what makes me see this, they don't care.
Well, caring about the future that we're all going to be in is what this is all about. So that's a good place to make a transition. So let me just say a word about the contest, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dean Francisco Veloso to close out and say a word of thanks to Jan Dowman, who will then say a word about Lord Harry Rennick. So the contest. The idea here is that we as people who are engaged in the world of science and technology have the privilege and the obligation of doing something with values that addresses the problems of the world that we live in to make it a better place. Here at the business school, part of our mission is to make smarter business that makes the world a better place. And so it's not just doing well because you can, it's not just doing something because you can, it's doing something that actually makes people better off. And when you do that, you'll find that you're enriched, and you'll also, if you have a conscience, you'll sleep better. So that's really the idea. And then over the months before the deadline, we'll be enlisting teams, soliciting you to tell us what you're going to do, and providing a couple of additional events that will give people inspiration along the way. We'll, of course, share tonight with subsequent online and with people who join us later. And so we're excited about this and to see where it takes us. So, Francisco, to you. But I'm allowing you to do this honorary thanks thing. So there we go.
Thank you very much, delighted, and thank you very much for the very interesting exchange of ideas here around this opportunity. And let me start with actually a very nice story that connects to the points that we're making here. That actually happened in this room a couple of weeks ago, and that's why I'm remembering that. Which is, we had here 2 weeks ago Louise von Ahn. So Louise von Ahn is the founder of two very interesting companies that one is still owned, the other one he subsequently sold. But let me explain why it's interesting to talk about Louise von Ahn. At that time, he was actually a student at Carnegie Mellon University, where I was a young faculty member. And Louise told the story here. He was visiting us, and he told the story that he was at a seminar at Carnegie Mellon as a student. And at that time, Yahoo came along. The CTO of Yahoo was talking to the students. And basically, he said, we've created this email, remember Yahoo email back then? Super successful, it's going in droves, it's getting all this attention, but we have a big problem. And the big problem is all these fake accounts that are not people, that are taking over our platform, and we don't know what to do. And it's really creating a huge problem. And sitting there was a student, Louise, that started to think about that and said, wait a minute, I got an idea on how we can deal with that. And I have the knowledge to do it because actually it's the idea and the implementation is rather simple because it has to do with how we interact with the technology. And that's the amazing thing about doing things with the students because they are at the cutting edge of doing many of these exchanges and taking that technology and working with it. And in this case, Louise was the creator of something that we all know, which is reCAPTCHA and CAPTCHA. So this notion of a human trying to find something like an image or something like that, that it's very difficult for a machine to do, but very simple for a human to interact and to identify, was a simple idea that now is one of the most used technologies around the world to basically separate the human from a machine on the way that we interact. And I really feel it's a wonderful example of what we're trying to do here, which is precisely to enlist the knowledge, but more than the knowledge, the ingenuity of understanding how some of these things are affecting our lives, and with the power of the basic knowledge to understand that perhaps if you do things a little bit different, we can actually make a big impact in the world, and often, or at least sometimes, not with very complicated solutions, but with very ingenious solutions. And that's really what we're trying to get here, and that's why this idea for this contest is so interesting, and that's why we're so grateful that Lord Renwick and through Jan Dalman, brought us, this idea, and that we've been working together with, of course, DSI and Mark and the rest of the team to bring you these. And that's why I started with this story. So I'm delighted to be here, delighted to welcome you, all of you, to thank you for your contributions and for your thoughtful provocations and challenges, many of which none of us has really a solution for, but this commitment to try to, really bring the ingenuity of a broader community to find these, different views, different takes, and hopefully, dampen some of these big challenges that we see, but also at the same time find new opportunities, which was what Louise did afterwards with Duolingo, which was the second company that he founded on the back of that. So thank you very much, and delighted to be here and handing over back to you then.
Thanks. I've got a piece of paper because I've got just to read from Computer Weekly, because it says it all really.
One thing is, if you are going to make it easy so that you can.
Oh, all right. Okay. Yeah. So Harry Rennick, who I knew for about 13 years and worked with very closely. It says, stood out far and away from most other peers in his active embrace and understanding of emerging information technologies, recognizing early on their potential for future economy, and he worked with governments actively and positively to reduce the risk generated by the digital revolution. Issues like legal jurisdiction, encryption, data protection, intellectual property rights, and so on. Very early on, he had identified these issues, and through often not recalcitrant colleagues, he advocated change policies and was one of the most influential people in Parliament. So I met him, I think 13, 14 years ago when he co-founded the Digital Policy Association. Carolyn here is the Secretary General. And with a colleague, we set up the Cybersecurity Working Group. And what we were trying to do is called security by design. For heaven's sake, let's build the security into the software and the hardware before somebody buys it, and not wait for a problem to arise and then patch it up, and that never works. Actually, today it's something like 70% of all businesses are vulnerable. Or maybe it's 80%. Still today.
I'd say all of them.
I was going to say, yeah.
Oh, maybe.
You're an optimist.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. All of them. You know, it's a train wreck, basically. But you can see the thinking there again was this forward-looking thinking. Let's do things. Let's proactively. I mean, the example we used was a very simple one. You don't buy a car without brakes. The safety's built in, right? And then we were jointly on the advisory board of a cybersecurity software company. We worked for 7 years advising the company, going around trying to promote this message of security by design. And he was an extraordinary individual who made an extraordinary contribution to our industry. And Lady Rennick's here, and he became a very close personal friend of mine, and with Lady Rennick as well. And so when he died, I determined to do something which was in the spirit of his lifelong contribution, which is why we've chosen this particular topic, which was his life. I mean, he was totally determined to promote managing these negative consequences. And everybody who knew him and worked with him owes a lot to Harry Rennick. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. My Small Family Foundation has one great attribute. I can support what I like. I don't have a committee. And since this is my alma mater, what better place for this competition? So I'd like to thank you, Julian, and our panel. I think this was really interesting. I hope that the video will go online to hundreds of students, because the object is, coming back to my earlier comments, to get the future, our students, to think about consequences at the time they're doing whatever they're doing, and proactively try to negate the consequences, at the same time as coming up with ideas to counter the problems we already have, stop new problems occurring as well. And what a better place than Imperial College students. So
Fantastic.
Thank you for joining, letting us work with you guys. It's a privilege, and we hope we'll have lots of entrants.
Indeed.
So thank you all very much.
Thank you.